Is it loud enough? All right. Good morning.
Turn it up.
Turn it up. I'll move it up.
Hearing aids.
Oh, okay. You want to borrow mine?
Yeah,
Can you hear me okay now? Is that better?
a little better.
Okay. How about that?
That's better.
Okay. I'll talk louder.
All
Okay. We've been continuing a series on the commands of Christ, and we've sort of been back and forth, interjecting things in between sometimes that weren't associated with it. And I'm back on that this morning. And just wanted to go over, it was a few months ago, a couple of months ago, I went over when one of my lessons on the commands, we looked at the opening verses of Matthew, in chapter 6. And there Jesus gives a warning that reaches much deeper than just outward behavior. And I'm going to summarize that, but I'll read Matthew 6:1. Take heed or beware. And that word in the Greek, prosete, is an imperative. So that means it's a definite command. So take heed that you do not let your charitable deeds be seen before men, to be seen by them, or otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Now, in that single verse, Jesus is laying down a governing principle for the entire section that he follows after that. And we went over a lot of that. But then he takes that principle and he applies it to three very personal parts of our life: giving, praying, and fasting. And he breaks that down and shows how this principle applies there. That principle is very simple, though, and yet it's searching. The summary of it would be, beware of doing the right things for the wrong reasons. And we sometimes are prone to do that, being humans. But at the heart of that warning is a question that every believer needs to ask themselves, all of us. Do I want the approval of God, or do I want the approval of the world? Now, Jesus is exposing our human tendency, which is natural for us. At least we seem to see that way, and we're not supposed to be that way. We're supposed to be godly and righteous. So that is where we are to change our nature. This tendency in our lives is for every one of us to be desired, to be noticed, to be affirmed or applauded. We want to be seen by other people. We want to be approved by them. We want to be in their good graces. We want to be thought well of. But even in spiritual matters, we can quietly crave the recognition of people more than the rewards of God often. He taught us how to give, he taught us how to pray, and he taught us how to fast in secret, in private, not publicly. And as we move forward in Matthew chapter 6, he tells us why we are to be living this way, why he wants us to be that way. And that's where we're coming into Matthew 6:19 through 21 this morning. And that's where we'll be starting at. And that verse is, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will also be your heart. Now, in these verses, Jesus is giving two very clear commands. One is a negative and one is a positive. And the first is found in verse 19. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. The word thesaurete it's an imperative as well. This is a very definite command. And it literally means stop treasuring up treasures here on earth. That's what he's saying. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures. The second command in verse 20 is, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. In other words, start treasuring up treasures in heaven. It's just plain and simple. Stop what you're doing right now and do something else. And before going further, we want to dispel some myths and misconceptions about the subject of money and material possessions. And these are common. You may not feel this way, but in the world, you do a little bit of reading, and when you talk to people, you will notice that most of these misconceptions, they hold, and they're not true. First, poverty is not spirituality. We sometimes associate the two, but they really are not. Nowhere does the Bible equate holiness with being poor, as some people believe. Some of the greatest servants of God, Abraham, Solomon, Job, David, those guys were wealthy. They had a lot of money. God nor Christ ever condemned wealth or having much of anything. Second, money obviously does not bring happiness, and I think we all know that. We're told that in our head, but we don't often feel it in our hearts. We still think, if I had this or if I had that, I would be happier. History has proven this repeatedly, that we feel this way, but it's so wrong. And if money brings happiness, then Howard Hughes should have been an insanely happy man. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but most of you have heard of him in one form or another. But I was reading an article that gave a little excerpt of him, and it was sort of a summary. And this man was fabulously rich. And I'm going to be reading from this quote from this article on his life. All he ever really wanted in life was more. And if you read any of his memoirs, he was a very wise and smart man. But he believed that the culmination of all of our experiences is what makes us. So therefore, he wanted all of that. But so to continue where I was at, all he ever really wanted in life was more. He wanted more money, so he parlayed inherited wealth into $1 billion pile of assets. He wanted more fame, so he broke into Hollywood and soon became a filmmaker and a star. He wanted more sensual pleasures, so he paid huge sums of money to indulge his every sexual urge. He wanted more thrills, so he built an aircraft company. He designed, built, and piloted the fastest aircraft in the world. He wanted more power, so he secretly dealt political favors so skillfully that 2 U.S. presidents became his pawns. All he ever wanted was more. He was absolutely convinced that more would bring him true satisfaction, and the more that he had and the more that he experienced would enhance his life. Unfortunately, history shows otherwise. He concluded his life emaciated, colorless, sunken chest, fingernails, and grotesque inches-long corkscrews, rotting black teeth, tumors, innumerable needle marks from his drug addictions, a germaphobe, and he was a hypochondriac. Howard Hughes died believing the myth of more. He died a billionaire junkie, insane by all reasonable standards. Ecclesiastes 5:10 reminds us, "He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance will be satisfied with increase." Solomon, after all his pursuits of wealth, pleasure, and experiences, came to the same conclusion, but he was wise enough to recognize it. And then third misconception is that being wealthy is not a sin. Some people think that it is. It's not. Again, nowhere in the scripture does it indicate that being and having much is a sin in itself. Money itself is morally neutral. It is an object. It is a thing. It's what you do with it and how it affects your life is where the issues come in. Fourth, and we know this, we have heard this, and again in our heart, in our mind we may know this, but money is not the root of all evil. We know that, and the scripture says, 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Yet, some of the sermons I read online or some of the articles I read from other churches and other preachers of various denominations, they still preach that money is the root of all evil, not the love of it. So in this passage that we read first, Jesus confronts us with a very penetrating question. Where is your treasure? The one that you hold. He helps us answer it by asking some questions, or leading us to those questions. And the first one is, how long will it last? Jesus begins with durability. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Now in Jesus' day, wealth was measured a little bit differently than what we measure it by, but it was very similar. It was measured by clothing, grain, personal possessions, power and influence, the same as a lot of it is today. But back then, fine garments were often eaten by moths, just as they are today, but it was more of an issue then. Much of the really fine clothing of that day was made of wool. That's where the quality was, and that was the expense. And it was especially susceptible to moths, and if any of you have wool, you know that it's an issue. They loved to eat holes in this fine wool clothing, and some of the people would have to work harder to prevent the moths from eating the holes in their clothing than they did to even procure that garment. It was what they had to do to keep it. And the word rust used in this verse, when we think of rust, we think of metal. We think of metal that is rotting or decomposing, or the surface, the color change of it. In a way, that is correct. But the definition of the word, and especially used here in the Greek, means an eating. And that is what rust is. It eats metal, right? But in this reference, what it means is, it's translated as speaking of mice and insects and vermin that eat their way into stored grain. That's what the rust problem was at Jesus' time, not what we think of it as. And then when they had homes that were vulnerable to thieves, they could break in so easily because they had these mud walls. They literally could dig their way in. So the point is unmistakable, that everything on earth is temporary. And we know that. We know it again in our mind, but in our heart we often act much differently. Proverbs 23:5 warns us, "For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like eagles toward heaven." So nothing we own is ever completely secure. Yet we often live as if we can keep it forever. When John D. Rockefeller died, his financial advisor was asked this question. And he said, he was one of the richest men in the world. How much did he leave behind? And the financial advisor simply said, everything. And he did. People have gone to astonishing lengths to take what they had with them. And we've heard stories and we've read stories. I mean, even back to the days of the pharaohs, they were buried with much of their possessions. They were buried with their slaves often. They wanted to take everything with them. People have these ideas about taking things like that with them. At least then, their excuse was is they believed that it would be with them there in the afterlife. Why do so many of us that know better still accumulate and believe that we can take this stuff with them? I read a story that was supposed to be true, and it's about this couple, and they were married. The woman, they called her Aunt Emma, so I'm assuming who told this story was a relative, but he referred to her as Aunt Emma. She was married to this tightwad who was a little strange. He made a good salary, but they lived very frugally, because what he would do is every paycheck he got, he would take 20% of it and put it under his mattress. He didn't trust banks. The money, he said, was going to come in handy when they retired. So Uncle Ollie, that was his name, when he was 60, he was stricken with cancer. And toward the end, he gathered his brothers around and his wife, Aunt Emma, and he made her promise in the presence of his brothers that when he died, that she would put the money that he had stashed away in his coffin with him. And he wanted to, just in case, he said he wanted to, if he needed to, buy his way into heaven. That's what he believed. The guy was strange, but up until this request, they had no idea how odd the guy was. But Aunt Emma did promise, and they're in the presence of the brothers, and she assured Ollie's brothers that she was a woman of her word, and she would do as he's asked. So the following morning after his death, she took the money out from under the mattress, and it turned out to be a little over $26,000. And she took it to the bank, and she deposited it. And then she wrote a check for the full amount, and on the day of the funeral, she put it in the casket. Okay? That smart woman, and I know that's humorous, but it reveals a very tragic misunderstanding that people have. And we cannot take earthly treasures with us because it was never meant, none of this was meant to last beyond this life that we are in now. So Jesus' command in the verses that we read is in the present tense. He says, stop storing up, accumulating or striving for more. That's so natural to us, but Christ calls us to redirect that instinct toward eternity. So the next question is, where are you investing your time and your money? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, Christ says. This verse overturns a common assumption that we have, and we often think that where our heart leads to our spending. You have a desire for something, you will spend money on it. So the heart leads. Jesus says that our heart follows our spending and our investment, whether that be money, time, or energy. It's the other way around. Where we put our time, energy, and resources, our affection soon follows. I once had a vehicle when I was in school. It was actually my first car that I thought was going to be, in my mind, my forever car. I was going to have it forever, one way or the other. It was a 1971 Plymouth Barracuda with a 446 pack in it. At that time, muscle cars were pretty common and easy to get. And it was not, I paid $1,900 for that car. Nowadays, that car, if it was in the condition I had it in, I cry when I watch Mecum auction or any of these things, and a Barracuda comes up, $150,000, $200,000. I mean, these cars, it's crazy. I would have put that thing up on blocks and completely submerged it in oil and just left it alone for the rest of anyway. But I had that car. When I first got it, I literally stripped the interior of that car out. It was in good shape, but it was not good enough for me. I took the seats out, I took the carpet out, I took the side interior panels off the inside of that car, and I cleaned it. And it was like a surgery room. I even got toothbrushes, and I cleaned every nook and cranny in that car. Then I cleaned the carpet, put it all back together again. The seats were white bucket, the bucket seats in the front were white leather. The car was a midnight blue. The back seats were leather, white leather. And I treated those with a leather treatment and then covered them and then put them back inside. You wouldn't know that they had the white leather because I had covers on them. I was so paranoid of hurting that leather that I never got to enjoy the seats. But I got all that back together. Then I went to the engine. I spent 2 days cleaning the engine. I was under it. I was on top of it. I was behind it. I was in front of it. The thing looked like showroom new, like it had just been put in. And that's how anal I got about it. Then I would wash that car every Sunday afternoon, and I waxed it, seriously, every 3 weeks. I waxed that car. It got to the point to where I was spending money on it that I didn't have. I was working more hours. I was in school. But I wanted to keep, it came with these special Firestone 500 red striped tires on there. And you probably, I don't know if you know what those were, but they were a little thin strip of white wall would be on a normal car. These were red. And big letters, Firestone 500 on them. Anyway, it came with those on there. Those things were not cheap. But I had to have those tires on there. I put my first stereo in there, 8-track stereo. And so you can see where this was going. I treasured this thing, but the point of it is that when I first got it, I liked the car a lot. But after I had put all this time, energy, and money into this car, I now loved this car. It was a precious thing to me because of what I had invested into it. And then 8 months later, after owning this car and trying to keep it this way, this grocery store I worked at, the parking lot, we'd park off to the sides. One night I came out and I'm walking toward it and something looked different about it. And then I noticed that, you have your parking stripes. It was cocked in the parking stripes. Some hit and run driver in the parking lot totaled my car. Okay. Because of, I don't want to even go into my reaction. And I think I dropped to my knees. But where do you think my heart was at the time? I mean, it was not with God. it was not, my investment in time and energy was not towards storing things up in heaven. But the thing is that I think God did me a favor by doing that. I don't know that he did that or was responsible, but I look upon it as a favor to me because of what I was doing and what I was turning that car into, as far as what it was taking from my life, me turning toward that rather than toward God. I didn't feel that it was a favor at the time, but now when I look back on it, I think it was a good thing that happened. Jesus does not condemn ownership or good stewardship. We do take good care of our stuff. It's an investment, and you don't want to be throwing things away and treat things badly, but he is exposing attachment to things, to money and material possessions here. He's not asking if we're going to invest in anything. He's asking where are you going to invest your time and your money and your energy. Earthly investments will always yield temporary returns. Heavenly investments are eternal, right? And Jesus asks us in Matthew 16:26, "For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world, if he loses his soul?" Several biblical passages support Jesus' teachings on earthly treasures, but the one I want to read, which is very good and applicable to this, is Paul's instructions to Timothy. And this is in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put it in their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." Now, before moving on, I want to go over additional considerations about treasure. When we think of treasure, we often think of money or financial things of that type. But we need to recognize that when Jesus speaks of treasure in the way that it's used, especially at that time, but it applies the same today, he's not speaking only of money or material possessions. Treasure is anything that we value most, anything that we prioritize or that we protect or pursue. So for some, treasure is time. And for me, I consider that a big issue because it's one thing I don't feel I have much of. But that is a treasure. We invest countless hours in hobbies, entertainment, careers, and personal interests while giving God what's left over. Ephesians 5:15-16 says, "Redeeming the time because the days are evil." Time is a treasure that can never be recovered. For others, treasure is approval or reputation. We guard our image, our physical image, and sometimes our reputation image carefully, and we fear what other people think. So we try to treasure up the good aspects of those things. Proverbs 29:25 warns, "The fear of man brings a snare." And the direct translation of that is basically the fear of what men think or the fear of men's opinion of you is a snare, because it will cause you to act differently than what you want to or what you know is right, just so that you will gain their approval. Some people treasure relationships, control, or security. And even good things, the good things that God gives us, can become idols. They can do that because we will let them take precedence over our bodies, over our lives, over obedience to Christ. Jesus said in Luke 14:26 that our loyalty to him must exceed even our closest relationships. He says, and I quote, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Now, the words he's using, he's trying to make a point. He obviously does not want you to hate any of these people because he doesn't want us to hate anyone. But he's making a point here. That is the severity of what he's saying. You cannot put even your family above me. Others treasure knowledge. I know a lot of people like that. Some of us do. They also treasure their own opinions or being right. they accumulate those things. 1 Corinthians 8:1 reminds us, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And then others treasure comfort or ease. They avoid sacrifice or inconveniences. They do what they can do to accumulate whatever allows them to have ease and comfort. I have worked with people that worked harder to get out of work than they did to actually do the work. I mean, I worked with some guys that went to such efforts to hide in the warehouse and take a break. They're always on edge, afraid they were going to be seen or caught, nervous and high-strung. Yet they did sit back there, and they would be back there playing cards and this, that, and other, but always on edge. And they worked harder at that and planned at that than they did actually if they just done the work they were supposed to have been doing. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Jesus says in Matthew 16:24. And then one of the more subtle treasures that we are seeing more and more, that I see a lot of people I work with now that are into that. I don't see it as such an overwhelming cultural thing here where we live at, as much as it is in especially more metropolitan areas, and maybe because it's not so easy for people to get out. But we store up in our culture today, a big deal is health and fitness. The Scripture is clear that our bodies do matter, and we're told in 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 20 that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, and we are to glorify God with them. We're to be good stewards of our body. Caring for our health is not sinful, and nor is discipline or diet or exercise wrong. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But even good stewardship can quietly become an obsession or a misplaced treasure. I know people, and some of you may, for many, that health becomes not a stewardship, but such a draw and an addiction or an obsession with them, especially with pride or security. We invest extraordinarily large amounts of time and money and energy, emotional energy, preserving youth and strength, our physical ability, and staying in shape. There are people that live for that. I mean, first thing in the morning, and then they go to work, and then at lunch they do things, and then when they get off they do things. They're always working on their bodies. They're always super hyper vigilant of their diet and the things they eat. And that's all fine and good, but it becomes an obsession. Entire schedules are built around workouts and training regimens for these people, meal plans and these performance goals. And when health becomes a treasure, then fear follows closely behind, because once you start developing gains, then you start fearing losing it. Then you start worrying about aging or weakness, what it's going to be like when I don't have this anymore, fear of losing control. And Jesus reminds us in 1 Timothy 4:8 that even the strongest body is temporary. Paul writes in 1 Timothy, for bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is and of that which is to come. Health has value, obviously, but it does not have eternity. And that is our goal, is eternity, not right now. When our physical condition becomes our confidence, our treasures have shifted from God to earth. Another common form of modern treasure found in pursuits, travel, and experiences. We live in a world now that, and I work with some younger people and have met some, to where the priority now is not so much of material possessions, but it's experiences. They're big on that now, which is a good thing over materialism, but again, it's another one of those things that gets out of hand. People say, I don't care about things, I care about memories. People are becoming more bigger on memories. Yet memories can become just as controlling in your life as material wealth is. We invest large sums of money and time into vacations, into adventures, into destinations and experiences, believing that they will somehow satisfy something deep in us, that it will give us something that we will have later on. So we are accumulating treasure here. We chase moments, we collect photos, we curate experiences, hoping they will define us and give us some meaning. So which are we more likely to do? Take a day off from work to go fishing or camping or something, or to take a day off from God to go fishing and camping. Trading worship and fellowship on Sunday for our own personal pursuits. Doesn't that demonstrate where your priorities are? Ecclesiastes 2:10 through 11 records Solomon's honest reflection on this. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Then I looked on all the works that my hand had done, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. Now, Solomon was very much like Howard Hughes in a lot of ways. He wanted to experience everything. He indulged in everything he could think of. And he was wise enough to see what the end results were, that it was all vanity and grasping in the wind. Solomon devoted time, energy, and huge amounts of money and interest and passions that he felt, yet he realized that none of this benefited him compared to what he would have with the kingdom of God. Treasure is whatever consistently captures our attention. Sometimes we have treasures we don't even realize until we sit and think about what we are doing, where our time is going. We have affections and we have allegiances, and anything that draws those is a treasure that pulls away from God. It's what occupies our thoughts and fuels our worries, and it often resists surrender because it's something we want. That's why Jesus' words were so penetrating when he said, "For where your treasure is, there will be your heart." So, where is our focus? The lamp of the body is the eye. Jesus says that our eyes are the lamps that will light the rest of what we have. His quote in that is very important here because it's sort of an internal thing. He moves from treasure to vision in this. And he says what we focus on is what fills us up. A single healthy eye, he says, one fixed on God, fills the whole life with light. A divided focus produces darkness. So if money or any other treasure becomes our focus, our spiritual perception is dimmed. Hebrews 12:1-2 calls us to lay aside every weight, and that being money or possessions is what he means, and look unto Jesus. And then that comes down to, who do you serve? Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now, the original English translation, and some of the translations, one you may be using, uses the word, instead of wealth, uses the word mammon. And it will say, you cannot serve God and mammon. The accurate translation of that and mammon is that money or material wealth or possessions. It means all pretty much the same thing. Jesus doesn't soften this statement when he says this. He makes it an absolute. He says, you cannot. He's very clear. There's nothing questionable about what he's saying. You cannot serve both of them. Money is presented, Christ is telling us, it is a rival master to us in our lives. And it demands loyalty. Both demand loyalty. God demands loyalty. Your possessions, and when you start accumulating things, it demands loyalty, or you cease to have them. But in meaning, it applies to anything that we are loyal to, or that we have allegiance to, or that we spend our time, our energy, and our money in. All of those things apply to that. If it takes our focus from God, then that is the treasure that we're storing up here. So if money or relationships or personal pursuits rule your hearts, God will not. He can't. It can't be both. Romans 6:16 reminds us that we become slaves to what we obey or what we hold dear. Financial, time, or energy bondage, especially debt bondage, often reveals or misplaced alliances then. Christ calls us to freedom. He doesn't want us to be slaves to this stuff. He wants us to release it, not let it rule our lives. Let Him rule our lives. So the principle in 6:19 can also apply, not just to money or personal possessions, but how much time and energy we allocate to our spiritual life, to spiritual matters. Rather than making money, investing in personal pursuits or our image or our health. Now, we should allocate proper time to activities such as the Bible reading, such to prayer, to fellowship with our brethren, to doing things for other people, things that focus on God. That's laying up in treasures in heaven, not doing things here. So when Jesus asks us, where is your treasure? He's not asking only just about your wallet. He's asking about everything else too. Your time and your energy and your allegiance. So you need to ask yourself, what do you invest in most in your life? What holds your attention the longest in your life? What commands your loyalties the strongest? Money reveals that. Time exposes it. Focus confirms it. And allegiances settle it. Righteousness, prayer, study of the Word, wisdom, peace, love, all of those things have more eternal value than any monetary or material wealth that we will ever have. Howard Hughes had probably at that point in time was one of the richest men in the world, and it served him nothing in the end. We store up heavenly treasures by doing our best to channel all of our energy and our resources toward godly concerns, not personal ones. If we do that, the Lord will take care of the personal ones. Jesus isn't calling us to empty lives, to boring lives. He wants us to enjoy what we have. That's the reason He often gives it to us. He wants us to be happy. But He wants us to enjoy eternity. He invites us to invest in what cannot be lost or stolen or destroyed. That's simply that. As Paul reminds us in Colossians 3:2, he says, set your mind on things above, not on things on earth. So today, the question remains, quietly and lovingly and personally, where is your treasure? And that's what I want to leave you with. If any of you have any prayers for the church or want to come forward with anything to bring before us, for us to pray for, or that you need help with, or anything along those lines, we ask you to come forward when James sings for us. Thank you.